All right, so just some quick housekeeping as we're waiting for people to come in. I've already said that we're trying to have everyone on mute, and so if you've come into the room, maybe just double check that so we lower the noise interference. But please feel free to keep your camera on. Although we've got the slides up, you should have a view where you can see some faces, and because we're in this sort of virtual world, it is nice to have a sense that there are people here, and we are in a live event, so please feel free to have your video on. We will be collecting some questions and comments in the comments section, so please feel free to drop them in. We've got quite a tight agenda though, so if we do not get time to have a Q&A session at the end of this event, we'll try to come back to everyone individually. So that's the end of housekeeping. We'll do some mute reminders if we're getting any noise interference, but it seems pretty good. So I'm your MC for today. My name is Zoe Baker. If we haven't met before, I'm a sector lead at the NABERS team. And to really begin this event, I'd like to make an acknowledgement of country and a recognition that we are in fact meeting on many different Aboriginal lands today. I'm at home at the Gadigal in Coogee. I'm on Gadigal country of the Eora Nation, and I acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands that I'm on, the lands that you're on, and show respect to elders past, present and emerging. And so hello to all the places that you are. So we are here to do a virtual ribbon cutting, and I'm sorry that we aren't doing this in person, but this is a really celebratory event. We're celebrating the ribbon cutting of the NABERS for residential aged care and retirement living ratings. Yes, that is a mouthful, and yes, you will hear me say it in full. We do refer to that sometimes as the RAC roll rating, but I will speak to that as retirement aged care and residential living. So it's a really exciting day for us. We're getting to launch this new tool. Anytime we're putting something out, we're very excited about it. And we get to do 2 today, 3 if we count co-located as its own rating. So this is very exciting, and it's been a really exciting time working with these 2 asset types and working with all of the stakeholders. So a bit of a rundown on what we're going to do today. You'll hear from Carlos Flores, who's our director at NABERS, and he'll be giving us a big picture about what NABERS is and does. And we will then be hearing from Suruchi and Supra, who work in our product development team. Many of you will have worked with them if you've been involved in the development of the tools. And they'll be taking us through how that process works and giving a bit of a shout out to the many stakeholders who have been involved. So that process is quite a long process. To those of you who have been involved in it will know. And it also involves so many stakeholders across industry, associations, organisations, residential aged care and retirement living building owners and operators. And we thank many of you who are in the call today and those who couldn't come. We just can't create something like this. We can't create our tools without involvement from the industry, and we're so appreciative of everyone who's been involved with us so far. We do also need to give another big thank you, and the expansion of NABERS tools to new sectors like these. It's a joint national initiative by states, territories and the Australian governments, and this project was funded by the Commonwealth Department of Industry, Science, Energy and Resources. We love an acronym, it's DISA. So thank you to our DISA colleagues for not just the funding, but also for your participation in the process as well. After we've heard from Suruchi and Supra, we're going to be actually hearing from a couple of the people who have been involved in the development so far, who'll be sharing with us kind of how they found that process and why they think NABERS is great. And then we will be wrapping up with Grace Fu from Delta Q, who's going to be sharing some tips on how to get the best out of your rating. And that will bring us to the end of the event. So that's what we're going to be doing. Thank you very much for being here to celebrate this launch with us today. There are a lot of you in the room, which just speaks to how enthusiastic the industry is, or your sectors are. And we're really delighted to be here today and to have gotten to this point. So I will now ask Carlos to unmute himself and I will pass over.
Thank you so much, Zoe. My name is Carlos Flores. I'm the director of NABERS in Australia, and I'm actually really excited to be here. This is actually quite a special day for so many of us working in this space. Um, and I wanted to welcome all of you. I want to tell you a little bit about why this is such a special day for us. The last time NABERS expanded to a brand new sector for us, a sector that we never worked in before, was apartment buildings and public hospitals, and that was back in 2018. It's been a few years since. So being here to formally welcome organizations from not one but two different sectors of the Australian economy is actually something that we're incredibly excited about. We work in this space because we want to help businesses and organizations to become as sustainable as possible. And for many of us, this is like the beginning. I know we've been working with many of you for a year and sometimes a little bit longer, but today's kind of like a day one for this next chapter that we are going to embark on together. Um, so on my next slide, I wanted to tell you a little bit about what NABERS looks like in practice. And as many of you know, NABERS is a sustainability certification scheme for buildings, and it's actually a national partnership of all governments in Australia. So that's the state territories and the Australian government working together, as well with many parts of industry. And we actually have 14 big industry bodies that sit in our governance itself. So it's a government industry mixed program that is very large, and there is a lot to NABERS that we could tell you about, but we're a little bit constrained in time. So there's maybe two things that I'd like to tell you about if you're not very familiar with NABERS that actually makes this program quite unique and very not just within Australia but also globally. Um, the first one is actually the NABERS itself, and our ratings are based 100% on meter performance. And what I mean by that is that the only way you get a better NABERS rating is by reducing your environmental footprint. So if you're doing an energy rating, the only way to get better is using less energy. If you're doing a water rating, the only way to do better is using less water. So that really is what NABERS is all about. And I think the second part is that we help answer a really important question that is very simple to ask, but very difficult to answer, which is, is my building, is my campus using more or less energy or more or less water than others, that similar buildings, than my competitors or other similar assets in a similar market? That's actually a question that is very hard to answer. Most people do not know the answer to that in most sectors of the economy, not just in Australia, but globally. Um, and what we do, we help answer that through a very simple star rating, a star rating that goes from 1 to 6 stars, and really has become a language for sustainability, building sustainability, um, that can be used by decision makers at all levels. So this is not just about engineers that work with these numbers all day. It's about really bringing sustainability and turn it into something that everyone can talk about, from your customers to your investors and donors to people that visit or live in these facilities. It really is about creating something that many more people can participate and engage with through these star ratings. Now, on my next slide, um, as I mentioned before, NABERS is new to residential aged care and retirement living, but we're not new, and we're learning, by the way, by the day. Every day we work with you, we're learning more and more about how the sector works and the kind of things we need to do to be able to help you and work with you. But we're not new to building sustainability. In fact, NABERS is the longest running sustainability initiative for buildings in Australia, and one of the longest runnings in the world. It was actually launched 23 years ago in 1998. That's actually an incredibly rare feat on itself. That means that NABERS itself, the program, is actually older than some of the youngest professionals we've seen coming into building sustainability by this point, which is actually almost unheard of in the realm of sustainability programs almost anywhere. Um, and the number is not just about that. The number of organizations participating in the program has been growing every year for the past decade, and NABERS today is the center of many, if not most, building sustainability policies in most sectors in Australia. And the reason why I wanted to mention that is because the reason why all of these things are happening is not just because NABERS is a good rating tool, which we believe that it is, but it is actually because of the incredible achievements that the thousands of professionals that work in the NABERS community that participate in the program have achieved in the last 10 or 20 years. And we wanted to do a little bit of a deep dive into that so you see what that looked like at the individual building level that for many of these buildings, and also zooming out and looking at the whole of some of these markets and just how much change has been happening in them. So on my next slide, I have zooming in all the way to an individual one building as an example, one of thousands of buildings participating in NABERS. is Australia Square. And we actually chose this building for a lot of reasons. One of them is that it's actually not a new building. It's not a new building that was built last year to the latest bells and whistles. It's actually a 53-year-old, maybe 54-year-old building by this point. In the heart of Sydney. It's an office building. If you're local here, you might actually know of the building itself. It's actually co-owned by Dexus and GBT, who are two very long-term participants in NABERS that joined the program over 15 years ago. And what this graph is showing is the journey of how this building went from being 0 stars, not very energy efficient in 2005, to actually become year on year setting targets and improvement, trying to work on this every year on their game, to actually becoming one of the most efficient buildings in the Sydney market. And I love this example for lots of reasons, but one of them is that it shows that sustainability is not just something for new buildings. Every building in every market can become more sustainable, and most of them can actually become very sustainable if we actually spend enough time and effort working on them to get them there. Now, I know that this is a specific building. I did want to show you, because this is just star ratings, but I wanted to show you what's behind this. And my next slide is really superimposing the energy consumption. What happened to the energy use for this one building during that time? Well, what happened is that it reduced energy consumption by more than 65% during that decade, which kind of reinforces something that I've mentioned before. The only way to get a better NABERS rating is actually using less energy consumption. And Australia Square is a great example of that. Now, before you accuse me that I'm cherry picking too much, I want to zoom out all the way and looking at the entirety of the office sector. And I'm going to go beyond offices in a minute, but I wanted to show you that NABERS has been around for 22 years in the office market. It was the first sector that we were working with. And by this point, we're working with about 80% of the floor area in offices across Australia every year. And it's not just actually in offices. So what this graph is showing is just the number of buildings we work with and participating NABERS on an annual basis. If you go to the next slide, you can see this is not just offices. There's other markets, and particularly shopping centers, which is a sector where NABERS is completely voluntary. There's no mandatory disclosure or any other policy that forces any of these buildings to participate in NABERS. We're working with about 68, almost 70% of all the floor areas of shopping centers every year. If you actually look at the last 2 or 3 years, we've actually certified almost every shopping center you've ever been to under NABERS in the last 3 years, and most of them in the last 12 months. So now all these graphs obviously are just showing the number of buildings participating in the program, which is not really the end goal. That's a good thing, but it's not really the end goal. The end goal is reducing environmental impact. So I wanted to show you what's actually happened in these two markets in the last 10 years, because a lot of people have not seen this data. So my next slide, I have a graph summarizing what happened with buildings in the office market, and we'll show shopping centers in a minute. What we do here is we take the first time a building is ever certified under NABERS, like the first NABERS energy rating, and then we see what happens the next year. What happens when they come back 2 years later, and 3 years later, and 4 years later? Are they actually using less energy consumption and less emissions? Are they actually improving? And what this is showing is the average reduction over time of energy consumption of the 2,500 or so office buildings we certified under NABERS. It's about 33% reduction on average after 10 years. So it's the whole office market pretty much. And the reason why I love this graph is that this is the single, by far, the fastest reduction of energy use in any sector of the Australian economy, and likely to be the fastest reduction of energy and carbon emissions of any sector, in any building sector in any country around the world. It's a big reason why, if you look at most of the international sustainability indicators, most of the rankings place the Australian office market as the #1 most sustainable market in the world, is partly because of the enormous amount of transformation that's happened in that sector. Now, I do want to show you one more graph, because it's not just offices. We've actually seen this in a completely different sector, which is shopping centers, which operates entirely different. This is like retail. Most people going into these buildings are transient, and that they don't stay there day in, day out. And we've seen a very similar amount of improvement over time, if anything, a little bit faster than the amount of energy savings we've seen on average in offices. And I wanted to show you these two things, because offices and shopping centers, the one thing they have in common is that the equipment that uses energy use is the same, because the equipment that uses energy in all buildings is the same. It's heaters and boilers, air conditioners, lighting, lifts. We're talking about the same items. So this kind of but the potential for this kind of savings across markets actually exists in the majority of sectors that work around buildings, including residential aged care and including retirement living. So a lot of our challenge as a program and for all of us working in this space is what can we do to actually spark this kind of transformation that happened, by the way, last decade with last decade's technology. Can we do that this decade? And I think the answer is yes, but it's actually something that we have to work together. This is a combination of both, government and industry rowing in the same direction to drive change like we've never seen before. On my last slide, and maybe just to close, I'm going to skip this one because I'm running a little bit out of time, but I'll go to the last slide just to close off and to wrap this up. That today, for me, this is I feel like we're planting some of the seeds that are really needed to drive the kind of transformation we've seen in some of these other sectors in the last decade. But basically, a mechanism that allows for the leaders in sustainability to basically be able to be recognized for their efforts, and not just like in the press. I'm talking about by their customers, by their investors, by their donors, by the community. So to be able to get a competitive advantage or a business advantage or community recognition that at the moment is actually sometimes difficult to obtain. And the second is a mechanism for buildings to actually set targets. How can I get better next year? How can I set a target to be better than average? And after that, can I be significantly better than average? And after that, can I be one of the best buildings in this city? I think these are the kind of things that we have seen at scale in other sectors, and I think we can achieve together in residential aged care and retirement living. So to me, this is the beginning of what we hope is going to be a really long-term government and industry partnership. These things can only be achieved in this scale by working together. But I do think it's a partnership that can deliver just an enormous amount of financial savings. We've seen $1 billion of energy savings in these other sectors, by the way. So it's not small savings, it's huge savings. But also a partnership that can help Australia become a real world leader in providing sustainable services for our senior citizens. And I do think we have all the elements that we need to make that happen, but I do think we need to work together. And to us, this is like the first day of that next chapter, and we look forward to working with you very closely to achieve that. Back to you, Zoe.
Thank you so much, Carlos. I hope everyone feels super enthusiastic and excited about NABERS ratings in general now. As Carlos mentioned, this development of a tool takes a long time. It's a long process, and as I kind of mentioned in the intro as well, we worked with a whole bunch of different people, providers, peak bodies, experienced consultants, and building and asset owners. And we gathered data from hundreds of facilities across Australia to work out how we were going to make this calculation work and make the rating work for you. So I'm going to hand over to my colleagues Suruchi and Supra, who are going to take us a bit through how that process went. And Suruchi and Supra, please feel free to unmute yourselves.
Thanks, Zoe. Good afternoon. So I'll kick us off. Suruchi and I are tag teaming on this one, and we'll quickly take you through what the NABERS tool development journey looks like, and then what does the NABERS residential aged care and retirement living tools look like, and then also take some time to acknowledge our incredible industry partners who have supported us and worked with us throughout this process. So what you see in front of you is the tool development flow, where we essentially kick off with data collection and technical benchmarking. We spent a huge chunk of time in these two steps during the tool development process. The purpose of benchmarking is really to address the fair comparison piece that Carlos touched upon earlier, where the idea is that we provide buildings in a given sector with the same level of playing field from a NABERS ratings perspective, regardless of their size, their geographic location, or even their operational characteristics. And the backbone of benchmarking is a rigorous data collection process. And as Zoe mentioned, we collected data from over 100 residential aged care, retirement living, and co-located sites. And we collected data on their annual energy use, water use, different size metrics, like, for instance, for retirement living, it was the number of dwellings, their site area. For residential aged care, it was along the lines of their occupied bed days, the number of beds, the number of residents, and so on. Also some data on operational characteristics and features as well. So presence of swimming pools, presence of heavy laundry on site, presence of gyms, community centers, and so on. And after collecting all of that data, that's when we moved into the benchmarking phase, where it was really about crunching the numbers and the figures and doing some regression analysis to then identify of all the variables that we collected, what are the key variables that we need to consider as part of the rating assessment. And that's what Suruchi will cover in a bit. And once we did the benchmarking, we then moved on to the rules development. So this is essentially a document for our independent accredited assessors, and it provides the details of the data required for rating assessments, the quality of data required, and also the supporting evidence or documentation required. And the purpose there is to really ensure that all of our ratings are accurate, consistent, and fair across the board. Parallelly, we also did a bunch of trial ratings with the intention to really test our benchmarks and rules. And then the outcomes of that were then fed back to the benchmarks and rules to further refine and finalize them. And as part of the trial ratings process, we ended up certifying 16 sites. So that's 5 residential aged care, 6 retirement living, and 5 co-located sites across Australia. So these are essentially the first residential aged care and retirement living sites in Australia to have a NABERS rating, which is fantastic. And during these first 4 steps, we also had 3 advisory panel meetings at regular intervals. The advisory panel consisted of representatives from the residential aged care and retirement living providers. They were members of technical consultants, our assessor community, and also peak bodies in these 2 sectors. And the idea there was to really provide updates on how we are tracking with the tool development, flag challenges that we are facing, but perhaps more importantly, also to get a lot of feedback and inputs from the industry to understand, oh, that's great, that's not great, scratch that, do that differently. And all of that was really helpful, and I think helped us launch a tool that we think will really add a lot of value to these sectors. And then we moved on to the development and delivery of our assessor training, which happened. The first one was delivered in June, and we had over 90 attendees, and right now around 70 of them are accredited for doing rating assessments in these 2 sectors. And parallelly, we also pursued, or we also developed our new cloud-based rating platform that we refer to as NABERS Perform. Our shopping centers assessors on the call will probably have a bit of a feel for what that looks like. This is certainly a massive step up from some of our existing platforms. And it's great that we have residential aged care and retirement living sectors on them already from the get-go. And after 6 simple steps, that leads us to today, where we mark the launch of, formally mark the launch of residential aged care and retirement living NABERS rating tools. And with that, I'll hand over to Suruchi.
Thank you so much, Supra. Thanks for taking us through this enormous journey we've had through the tool development. I'm going to talk a little bit about, after all this hard work, what new NABERS tool we have and what exactly would they rate in terms of coverage. So you are all ready to take up your sustainability journey for your facilities. So we have now NABERS would be able to rate a residential aged care facility for its energy and water rating, a retirement living facility, and also a co-located facility. A co-located facility is essentially residential aged care and a retirement living, as the name suggests, which coexist and which is quite popular probably moving forward. It's very easy for residents to move from retirement living to a highly assisted residential aged care. So those facilities are also being very popular for builders these days. These are the 3 facilities which can get a NABERS rating now after the launch today. What I'll talk about a little bit is what they cover, what's the coverage for the rating tools in terms of energy and water, and what sort of variables which we finally came to after all that rigorous process in benchmarking. For energy and water rating tool, the residential aged care would cover the whole site, which means it's covering the whole facility, everything which is being consumed within the residential aged care, except obviously if there are non-facility residents or a commercial tenant use happening. So, and for retirement living, a rating will be covering the common areas of the retirement living. What that means is it would be the gym, the pool, the kitchen, or any such common areas, even the street lighting. That's where the energy rating will cover. It wouldn't cover the independent dwellings, which are the townhouses or the villas. It would also cover is the service apartments, the centrally serviced apartments. And that's what the retirement living energy tool looks like, anything which supports the dwellings. Whereas the water retirement living energy tool will cover the whole of the site, except obviously the use which is done by the non-residents or the commercial tenant use. And again, the co-located is a combination of the both. We have the energy rating for co-located. However, a co-located site can rate the residential aged care separately and retirement living separately in case they want to know how their each facility rates, provided they are submitted. In case they are not, if they exist as a one premises, they can rate themselves as a co-located facility for their energy as well. So there are sites which are probably sit under one premises and which are not separately submitted. So the NABERS tool will be able to rate those facilities as well, which is great. As Supra mentioned, so the rigorous benchmarking process, which the whole flow which we just he presented, it was a long process, and we came down to some variables which actually make an impact in the consumption, and hence the rating. Through those variables is what the rating will be determined or calculated. I'll go a little bit, I won't go through detail, but I'll go a little bit through the variables or the inputs which we will be using to calculate this rating. The size variable, the determining size variable for residential aged care will be OBD, which is the occupied bed days. And for the retirement living is the total number of dwellings, which is the townhouses or the villas, and also the number of...
Sorry, Suruchi, we've just had a request if you can slow down a tiny bit,
Sure.
because people, trying to absorb all the information. Thanks.
Sure.
We're fine for time, Suruchi, don't worry about it.
Okay, no problem. Yeah. So yeah, I was talking about the variables, and for the residential aged care facility, the variables will be covering is the occupied bed days, like I said, to capture the size. And for the retirement living, it will be the total number of dwellings plus the number of centrally serviced apartments and also the site area. Obviously, retirement livings are also very widely acreage sites or also like a vertical sites, but our tool is catering to at the moment the standard retirement livings. We are also working behind the scenes to see how this can cater to the vertical retirement livings as well. To talk about the variables from the site features, these were the size variables. With the feature variables, we've got in terms of average weekly meals for residents or non-residents. So for residential aged care, it will be the average weekly meals for non-residents. Why that is the case is because most residential aged care would have kitchen on site. So what is the variable factor or the variation factor is if they are cooking meals for non-residents. If that makes sense. So that's the variable we are capturing for residential aged care. That is the average weekly meals for non-residents, and also the heated pool surface area and the presence of laundry, if there is a laundry on the site or not. I'm not going too much into detail because it's a little bit technical, but I'm just touching base on those variables so we have an idea how this rating is being processed. To talk about the retirement living site variables, we've again got the average weekly meals. And in this case, it's the meals which are cooked on the site, because again, for retirement living, it's not the case always that there's meals being cooked on the site for a retirement living village. But if they are, we want to adjust for that. And likewise, there's pool surface area for heated and unheated pools. So these are a little bit of insight into what the variables or the inputs would be, which would go into the rating to calculate a correct apples to apples comparison of your residential aged care or a retirement living. Now, obviously, the tool is developed by NABERS team, but I would like to say it's not us, it's you who have done it. Why we are launching it today is it's all because of you. It's starting from the residential aged care or the retirement living providers who've given us their time, who've given us their data or relied us with the information, who've given us their time to do the trial ratings. I know there's a number of us who a lot of providers have put together all that data or the rating information for us to calculate those ratings as pilot ratings as well. So I really thank all of you from the bottom of our heart. It was totally impossible without your cooperation and support. And also, I would say there's expert consultants and the consultants who worked on this project, TeltaQ, and the assessors who came together with their expert advice to make this tool as robust as it is now. And last but not the least, the peak bodies. The peak bodies like AXA, LASA, and ACIA. They have been the champions and the advocates for the rating tool. And I'm just surprised how much support we've got from peak bodies to let the providers know that there is a tool coming and how everyone can get involved. So I really want to thank every one of you to make this possible and bring this rating tool together. Can I have another slide, Zoe? Yeah. So I wanted to take a moment to celebrate each one of you here, because every one of you have participated in this tool in some way or other, and that's how we were able to sort of launch this tool today. So I would keep this slide for a couple of minutes. If I have missed anyone, please forgive me. But I really want to thank every one of you for putting all your time, effort, and support to make this tool possible. Thank you. I'm wondering, Zoe, if there was a slide on NABERS Perform, I can take a little bit of peek through that. Yes.
Yeah.
So I'm very excited to say, just like Supra just mentioned, we've got this tool ready to roll on our new platform, which is NABERS Perform. Luckily, the new tool is available, and assessors who know, they'll be very happy to know that the Perform is ready to rule for residential aged care and retirement living. So probably you'll receive your login details at the back of this launch today, and you should be able to even start your rating if you like. And for owners, Zoe and Grace will go a little bit further on how to start looking for an assessor, or how to start looking if you want to start your sustainability journey and start your rating. The platform is a very user-friendly platform, and just like I talked through the different inputs, which will be facility size and features, which we've gone through, and obviously the 12 months of data consumption for energy and water, and then it calculates the star rating for you for energy and water, and then generates a certificate for you. So it's a great platform, and we'll be very delighted to see a lot of ratings coming through from the industry. Thank you so much. Thanks, Zoe. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Suruchi and Supra, for taking us through that. And to all of these people who have been involved in the development, massive thank you from all of us at NABERS, because as everyone has said, we can't do this without you. And we're just so grateful for the time and effort that you put in, and for your enthusiasm through that process. So speaking of participants, you know, this could have been a pre-recorded webinar, and I know some people will watch it afterwards, but we're live here. And to get a sense that there's people in the room, which there are, I have pre-organized, so don't worry, I'm not going to put anyone on the spot. I've got a couple of people in the audience who I am going to ask some questions of from these very generous people who've been involved in the development over time. So my first question is for Tim Wheeler from the Property Council of Australia. Tim, I know you're on the call, so if you can unmute yourself and prepare. I know that you've been involved in this sector work over the years, and I wondered if you could just give us a bit of insight into where you see this sector working, developing, any of the barriers and issues, and perspective from you guys.
Yes, thank you so much for having me today, and thank you to Zoe, Carlos and the team for the incredible work that you've done on this tool. The Property Council and our members have been long-term supporters of NABERS and all that it achieves. We've seen some incredible work in the past, in particular in the commercial office sector, where, as Carlos was outlining previously, there has been an incredible turnaround in the amount of energy used per square meter over time. And it is almost unique in the world, so it's an achievement that has really placed Australia at the forefront of a lot of this discussion. And so the retirement living sector, which is represented through the Property Council's Retirement Living Council, is an extremely important sector to us. And putting this tool at their disposal to be able to hopefully mimic some of the successes that we've seen in other sectors around Australia is a terrific step in the right direction. Not just for reducing bills, and for energy efficiency, reducing our emissions over time. Those are all great benefits that are delivered through this. But we also know that energy efficient buildings are more comfortable for residents. And so we see this having much broader benefits than just the environmental and cost saving aspects to it. So I'll just finish by saying that on behalf of the Property Council and our members, we're really excited to see this tool out there, and we look forward to engaging with it and seeing success throughout the retirement living sector. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tim, for those insights and for being a live member of the audience. My next question is for Anthony from the Royal Freemasons Benevolent Institution. Anthony, I know you're on the line as well, and you guys were involved in some of those trial ratings, and I was wondering if you could share with everyone how that process was.
Yep, thank you, Zoe. RFBI loved being a part of the NABERS trial rating scheme. We were involved quite early on in the project, having to provide NABERS with our site details. Our sites span throughout Metro Sydney, regional New South Wales and the ACT. All this information was collated to assist with industry benchmarking, as Supra had mentioned earlier. For the trial ratings, we're also lucky enough to nominate 2 sites, one of which was a co-located site. From this, we did receive both residential aged care facility and a retirement village rating scheme, as well as a co-located rating scheme. From the start, the assessors came through that were on behalf of NABERS, conducted a thorough data collection assessment of our 2 sites that we had nominated. This was then measured against the benchmark data. As a result, we're quite happy with the ratings of our buildings. It certainly helped us understand which part of our sites need some attention and what we can do within our buildings to make them more efficient to better help our ratings. So huge thanks to Supra, Saruchi and the rest of the NABERS team for your assistance in this project.
Awesome, thank you very much. And Kalpesh from Stockland, audience participant. Stockland's obviously a big property owner with a range of different asset types. I was wondering if you could share a bit around how NABERS ratings fit into the work that you guys are doing.
Sure thing. Thank you, Zoe. As a quick introduction, my name is Kalpesh Patel, Sustainability Manager from Stockland. And look, in answer to your question, yes, that's correct. Stockland has a continued history of using NABERS ratings for both energy and water across some assets, including retail town centres, workplaces, business parks, and our own corporate offices. Through the NABERS Accelerate program, we were once again able to collaborate with industry partners in the development of a tool which would align essentially with one of our community's business, being retirement living. I guess having an industry recognised benchmark for the retirement living sector is certainly an important step forward for the entire sector. And for us as Stockland, the pilot that we were involved in, which is 2 assets across our portfolio of operational sites, helped us to identify how such assets are performing currently, and also gives us the opportunity to understand where there's room for improvement. So as per everyone else, just a great big thank you from us also in allowing us to participate and provide you our feedback as well as part of that process. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Kalpesh. Much appreciated. And to the 3 of you, thank you very much for being part of our informal part of the event. Now, I'm just going to go back to the slides, although that was a nice bit of FaceTime there. So the couple of things, as Suruchi mentioned, right, you're feeling enthusiastic and you're ready to go out and get a NABERS rating. How do you do that is our next section. And we have the find and assess the area on our website that now can be searched for residential aged care or retirement living. So that's the best place to find an assessor. You'll find everyone who's accredited, and as Supra said, we've got a bunch of assessors who now have that accreditation and are ready to have customers. So that's the first hot tip. Go there, find an assessor. We do also have a couple of calculation tools that we have ready for the sectors. And just to very quickly touch on this point, so ESCIs, I'm not sure who's familiar with them or not. This is essentially a sort of energy savings rebate scheme that's available in New South Wales. There are similar schemes in Victoria that I won't kind of touch on too much, but just to point out, if you are looking at rating sites that are in New South Wales, we are expecting that changes that exist to being able to use the NABERS rating to generate ESCIs will be coming on hopefully early next year. So coming into effect December, January. So the call really is, if you're doing New South Wales sites, make sure you talk to your assessor about how to include that and make sure that they are registered to assist with that. So that's a great scheme that really will help you fund some of the work that you're doing and get recognition for your work. So just a point is, talk to your assessor. They will know of other schemes that are in industry and other ways that you can kind of turn those savings eventually into something really exciting. And to talk further about that, what do you do once you've got a rating and you're ready to go? I'm going to invite Grace now to unmute, and she's going to take us through how to get a NABERS rating and that real practical process. As you've heard, there's a lot of data that you need to collect. So Grace, over to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Zoe. So my name is Grace and I'm a principal at Delta Q, and I've got the pleasure of being the face of presenting what to do next from the perspective of a aged care and residential retirement living provider. So they say that it takes a village to raise a child. And before I move on, I really need to thank my team at Delta Q, who was involved from the very start in doing a lot of the benchmarking and data collection. And some of those names and faces that you see on the call today, you might recognize because they've been pestering you, talking to you to better understand your sector so that we can build a tool that suits you. So next slide, please. Zoe's gone through to say that today is all about a celebration. You've heard a lot about the tool, what it covers. Suruchi's gone through the variables. Carlos is giving you a rundown on the sector and its potential impacts. And you've also heard from some of the stakeholders that were involved in the rating process to tell you what is involved. And you're sold. What next? So I'm going to keep this relatively short and snappy, probably about 5 minutes. And just to go through 6 tips for you, 3 tips covering before your rating, what you should do, and 3 tips after your rating on how you could actually use the NABERS rating. Next slide. So the very first thing you would do now that you're sold is to find an assessor. Talk to an assessor through one of the methods that Zoe has showcased to you. There's a register that you can look for, accredited assessors, and find out more about the rating that you are planning to do. Now, there are documentation requirements to complete a rating, and the whole purpose of that is to ensure that you have a rating that has the integrities that you can trust because everyone is doing it the right way, and it's based on operational data, not design data. So it's actually about your operational performance. So your assessor would tell you whether you would be eligible for a residential aged care energy or water rating, whether you're eligible for a retirement living energy or water rating, or if you're a co-located site where you've got both facilities on the same premise, whether you can go for a single rating or a combined rating. So they can tell you all about what rating you're eligible for, and following on from that, what information you would need to collect. So what you can see on the screen there are just some of the variables that you would need to collect data for. So we've already gone through them, and this is not a technical talk, so I won't go through it. But essentially, you might be introduced to the concept of having to obtain data for site area. And for that, you need to seek or purchase some land titles, for example. Your assessor will need that information in order to do the rating. Other information that you may need to start collecting if you haven't already got them ready is things like meals. Are you collecting information from your kitchen staff or catering staff to say what hot meals are you preparing every day and how many are you preparing per day? The other question that you might want to find out is, of those data, do you have the data covering 12 months? NABERS is all about your performance for 12 months of operational data, and that doesn't only apply to utility data, it also applies to some of these operational requirements. So for example, if you have been cooking meals, has your kitchen that is on site been operational for 12 months? Or do you have only collected data for 3 months? Same thing for your pools. Maybe you've had your pool shut down and it only became operational 2 months of the year. Talk to your assessor about how that affects your rating. Now, they may come back to you to say, you need this data and that documentation, and at the moment you're not compliant, you cannot proceed with the NABERS rating. But that is great insight in itself because you can then start collecting that data, and 12 months later or less than 12 months later, when you've got 12 months worth of consumption data or information, you can go through the rating process. Next slide, sorry. Second tip, all right. So I've talked about how there is plenty of documentation and coverage information that you would need to understand, and your assessor can tell you more about that. NABERS is also about the actual operational performance based on what's happening on site to allow that apples for apples comparison. And that means that if there are changes in occupancy, this is particularly relevant for residential aged care, and you might already be very familiar with the concept of occupied bed days, but ensuring that you have that documentation and records in place will make your rating a lot easier. Registration details, so that would be probably more relevant to retirement living. If you've got dwellings or you've got apartments that are still vacant and unregistered, you're going to have to need to actually record that data and provide that to your assessor. When did that vacancy or non-registration occur, and when did you actually then lease or sell that space so that it's registered a particular resident? So there are concepts around a registered or licensed dwelling and not that you would need to get across when you're doing your rating. And finally, there's a concept of availability. Has your pools been available to your residents, or have you shut that down because it was COVID, for example? You want to ensure that you have the dates of when that was available and when it was no longer available and available again, all recorded. Next slide. Number 3, so before you're rating, one of the things that is most helpful to you and your team if you're going through a rating is to find out where your meters, or in fact, where your bills are. NABERS and energy rating, for example, will cover all fuel sources. It'll cover electricity, gas, it'll cover delivered fuels as well. So LPG, liquefied petroleum gas. In some of the states, that may be built to you, delivered to you on a monthly basis, quarterly basis, Same thing for diesel as well. You're going to need to ensure that you keep and document and file away your bills, ideally electronically. But your assessor is going to be ensuring that all of the energy consumption and water consumption going to your site is included in that rating coverage. And they'll also need to find out and cite your actual meters and find out what the actual end use each meter covers. So it's not enough to just say, I have a meter somewhere located at the front of the property. Your assessor is going to need to understand what end use does it cover. Do they actually need to include that particular meter and its bills in the rating? Next one. 3 more tips now after your rating. So you've gone through the rating process. You probably now have a much better understanding about your premise itself. I'm not surprised to hear from some of our stakeholders and people that have gone through a NABERS rating to say, oh, I never knew that I had a meter out here. This is surprising. Now I know what that coverage is. You can actually then do something about it. This is your opportunity. Your NABERS rating and your NABERS assessor could be your best asset in better understanding your site. They're out there looking at your documentation, looking at your site. Make sure you ask them what opportunities they found. Now, if you haven't it's actually much better for you to ask them to keep an eye for that upfront as well. Now, 3 things that could be relevant here. Do you have a modern facility that's just come online 12 months after construction and you were expecting a really great rating because you had a great design, but you've got your NABERS rating and it's coming out at 3 stars, 4 stars, instead of what you expected it to be as a, say, 5 stars? Ask the question, how is it different from my design assumptions? Has there been controls that hasn't been implemented for my very efficient plan? So we've definitely seen a lot of evidence for that in some of the ratings that we've done as well. You want to ask the question, is there opportunity to submit to any end users for exclusion? Do you have end users connected to your facility or premise that's actually not part of your retirement living facility or residential aged care? One of the very interesting things that we've found through some of these ratings is that there's been people that were connecting to the facility's common area plug points and actually drawing power from it. They wouldn't have known about it until they did the NABERS rating. Can you decarbonize your site? If your site has net zero aspirations, can you decarbonize using on-site renewable generation or improve your water rating by recycling or harvesting water? Next slide. You've got your NABERS rating and you've either you're surprised by NABERS rating that you've got, or you're not surprised by your NABERS rating that you've got because that was what you expected. But this star rating, this very simple metric of a 6-star scale, it's a great conversation starter. Make sure you talk to your site staff and your residents, because what they do and how they treat records, whether they turn on an equipment or turn off an equipment, how they cook in the kitchen, do they understand how the way they operate can affect site efficiency? Use this as an opportunity. We've talked about the concept of centrally serviced apartments and water being the whole site, rather than whole facility. This means that what your residents do in their own space can often affect the overall efficiency of the entire premise. So use this as an opportunity to connect to your stakeholders on site. A simple metric 6-star system. And finally, next slide. The 6th tip for you is to keep monitoring, tracking, and certifying. So this NABERS ratings are a great tool for you to verify your performance. So if you're planning new works, you want to put in new equipment, you want to put in on-site generation, and you're expecting X amount of performance out of that, use the NABERS rating. So do the estimates, do the calculations, and then implement your works and spend the next 12 months tracking it and see if it actually occurs. This is also the best way, as Zoe pointed out before. This is how you get funding. It's all about that MMV, measurement and verification process. It's very exciting that you can now bring that power into the sector, which is actually the 8th largest commercial buildings energy consumption on the national electricity market. So on the grid, essentially. Has your operational occupancy changed? Have you reduced the number of occupants or residents? Dwellings are empty, or maybe you're doing refurbishment to half of your assets. Has your NABERS rating changed? If it hasn't, well, if your energy consumption hasn't changed, even though you've reduced operation, looking at your star rating is an opportunity to turn on your services. Now, if it's not changed and there is opportunity to optimize it, ask your NABERS consultant, use this opportunity to tap into that expertise.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Grace, for those insights and hot tips. I think that's a really great place to kind of bring us to the conclusion of the event. So it's been amazing to hear more about this. I hope everyone's gotten a lot out of hearing how we developed the tool and all the opportunities that are in it. This is the point where, you know, Supra and Suruchi's team and the whole product development team kind of hand over their brand shiny new baby to us in market development. And I'm so excited to bring this out into the market now. I'm relatively new to NABERS, so I haven't been there for any of this development. So I feel quite privileged to kind of have been handed this very shiny product over. And I just wanted to say that having spoken to so many of you, or to those of you in the development of the launch event, I've just been so impressed about how positive everyone's been, and how that energy and excitement about the NABERS for these new sectors has been reflected. So that's really exciting for us. I think that although we may not expect that your residents or your customers are going to be a massive market demand for sustainability work or for these kind of products, I was also reflecting on that your sectors are care sectors, and that you will have organisational values where that measure and manage and continuous improvement and running our buildings as best as can do fit with the values of your organisation and the aspirations and the real core business of your sectors. So it's something that we hope everyone is really excited to go away and get a NABERS rating if you haven't already done one. If you're at the start of your sustainability or building performance journey, we are so looking forward to being on that journey with you. And for those who are bringing these new asset types into existing benchmarking, welcome. We're so excited you're here too. So we're looking forward to seeing what you can all do with this. And I want to thank everyone who's participated in the event today, all of our stakeholders who've been involved in that development. On behalf of everyone at NABERS, thank you so much for everything that you've done to date. And everyone who's been here to celebrate the launch, thank you for being here. And we'll look forward to seeing you at the next opportunity to talk about residential aged care and retirement living and the next NABERS products that we bring out. So thank you again.